Hi, everybody. It's 7 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Social Emotional Learning, Creating Connections and Building Resilience. We're so glad that you're here joining us tonight. My name is Janie Everett. I am the Educational Technology Manager at WHRO, and that role basically just means that I provide professional development for teachers throughout Virginia. WHRO is located in Norfolk, and we are actually owned by 21 separate owner school divisions. So we do a lot of really great things for schools. We do a lot of van visits, parent trainings, teacher trainings, events like the spelling bee, the writers contest, the Great Computer Challenge. Those are all things that we help put together for the community. So you will probably see me in more professional development sessions in the future. As a matter of fact, we have another one coming up next week, kind of a follow-up to tonight's social emotional learning webinar. And next week, I'm going to be focusing more on some digital tools that we can utilize to build materials that promote social emotional learning in the classroom. So if you are interested in joining us next Wednesday as well, I will send out more information about that webinar after tonight's webinar. The registration for that webinar is going to be posted at whro.org/webinar. I'll put that link in the chat as soon as I'm finished talking here, and I'll also send that out to you via email. If you have any questions tonight, we highly recommend asking all of those questions. Feel free to use that Q&A section to ask all of your questions. If we don't get to them immediately, we will come back to those questions at the end. So don't fret if we don't get to it right away. We'll circle back around to all those questions if they haven't already been answered in the middle of the presentation tonight. After tonight's webinar, sometime within the next couple of days, by the end of this week, you're going to see an email come out from me, Janie.Everett at WHRO.org, and that's going to have a couple of things in it. You're going to see a very brief survey so that you can let us know how we did tonight, and also you'll be able to let us know what types of webinars you would like to see from us in the future. We are also going to include the link for the slides that you're going to see in tonight's presentation and any links that are included in the slides as well. I'm going to send you a link to where you can find a recording of tonight's webinars, and also a link for where you can find future webinars hosted by WHRO, as well as all of our past recorded webinars as well. I'm also going to send you a certificate of attendance for tonight for 1 hour, and that will have the topic of tonight's webinar, and it will also have the date and your name on it as well. So all of that being said, thank you again for joining us. And now I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful presenter, Heather Peterson.
Thanks so much, Janie. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have the opportunity to spend a little bit of time learning with you all this evening. This is a topic that I am super passionate about. I probably crammed 5 hours worth of stuff into less than an hour because, as Janie mentioned, we want to save some time at the end to answer questions. So again, feel free to use the chat feature as a back channel. I will try to tune into it, but as Janie mentioned, we will save time at the end to intentionally answer questions. Those of you that are here, I will drop also a link to the slides, and then Janie will send those out to you as well. So the slide deck serves more as a handout, and there are some live links in there as well. So again, welcome tonight. Thank you for being here. So as we step into this space together tonight to learn, after a long day of supporting young people and adults, I invite you to use that breathing circle, take a couple of deep breaths this evening as we step into this space. I know there's a lot of heaviness around us right now, but to enter this learning space, I'd like to shift our emotional states. And I invite you again, take a couple deep breaths, but I also invite you, if you so feel like it, to drop into the chat tonight, what brings you joy? What brings you joy? So as we step in a place to learn together, coming from a space of joy, again, taking some collective breaths just to center ourselves and step into this learning space, I invite you again, anything that brings you joy that you want to share in that chat feature, just take a minute to honor us checking in and stepping into learning together. Yes, I see that family time, having those fur babies, walking the dog and reading a book. Yes, the beach, family dog, soothing music. Yes, our fur family is important. Bird watching, family on the beach, kittens, seeing your own kiddos succeed. Stepping back and doing nothing, Tim, absolutely. A great sunset, pottery. Welcome, Anthony. So again, just taking a minute to center ourselves as we step into this space together. Serving students and family brings joy, yoga and art, working out, absolutely, absolutely. So again, thank you. Oh, the pear tree, I bet those blossoms are beautiful. Ooh, repairing shoes, that is joyous. That's fantastic. Having that downtime, spending time with the dogs, absolutely. Aw, spending time with the family, especially grands, reading and knitting. Yeah, great. Yes, family and friends. Ooh, baking fresh bread. That smells good too. Absolutely. Music, yes. Spring break. Yeah, so I love the diversity of answers, right? We see some commonalities, but we also know different things bring different people joy. So again, as we enter this space of learning together, just want to honor the different backgrounds that you bring to this space, the different roles that you serve. Tonight, we're going to take a look at two different aspects of learning. We're going to take a look at social emotional learning as a whole and a few strategies there, and then we're going to pivot and we're really going to think about it through the adult lens and this notion of resiliency. So first, I want to share an updated definition of social emotional learning with you. Why are we talking about this? Why now? How we can infuse social emotional learning throughout the day, and then again, rounding out the session, really focusing on you and being selfish and thinking about as educators our own sense of resilience. So just to get a sense of where we are, how do you rate your knowledge and use of SEL? And you can throw these in the chat for me. Again, you've never heard of SEL, I'm a beginner at this work, I'm an intermediate, I'm advanced, or I'm expert level, just to get a sense of who's in this space with us tonight. So you've never heard of this, it's a new concept, I'm a beginner, I'm somewhere in the middle, I'm pretty advanced at this, or I would even consider myself an expert. So just throwing that in there. So we've got some beginners, some intermediates, we got some, it looks like we have a couple advanced folks. Yeah, absolutely. Beginner moving toward intermediate. Great. Great. So we've got some diversity between new and intermediate. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for giving me some context of who's out there so that I can make sure to acknowledge the space that we're in. So just a teeny bit about me and my journey and why this work matters to me so much. I am entering, or in the middle, I should say, of my 18th year with Hampton City Schools. I spent a huge chunk of that time in Title I supporting Title I schools. I have shifted into the Director of Climate and Culture for the past 4 years, so I support all of our schools and all of our departments in the work of climate and culture. And for the past 3 years, we have been on a very intentional journey of infusing social emotional learning into our everyday work because we know it promotes a positive climate, a positive teaching and learning environment, and it also impacts academics. We do not adopt a program in Hampton. Again, we make it part of our climate and culture and infuse it within our curriculum. Additionally, the past couple years, I've been blessed enough to be able to serve some schools outside of Hampton and Newport News, Williamsburg, and now doing quite a bit of work out in Illinois. And it's just widened my perspective of why this work of meeting both adult and young people's social emotional needs is so paramount. So with that being said, what I would like for you to take away from tonight, that integrating social emotional learning is a journey indeed. It is not about the right path. It's not about the one way. It's about creating the path that meets the needs of your students, your families, and your staff. But we have to be intentional about this work. We have to be intentional about this work. So when we talk about social emotional learning, this is the definition that is most commonly used. There are lots of organizations out there promoting this work. Social emotional learning is not a new concept. It's referred to oftentimes as emotional intelligence, components of multiple intelligence, but the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, CASEL as they're referred to, has this definition that they have created and expanded since December of 2020. So if you're familiar with CASEL, the highlighted attributes that you see there are additions to the original definition. What I love to lift up here, again, is that it's not a program or an initiative, but they clearly state it's a process, and it's not just for young people or students, it's also for adults, and a way for us to apply knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And we do that through these 5 big competencies that you see to your right. Several organizations that promote social emotional learning, some have as many as 27 different competencies. CASEL really drills down to these 5 big competencies and then the skills, attitudes, and knowledge that go with these components. So again, things like developing healthy identities, managing our emotions, achieving personal and collective goals, again, how we feel and show that empathy for others, how we maintain and establish those supportive relationships. And not only do we want to make responsible decisions, but we want to make caring decisions. So again, just lifting this up for you, this will be my point of reference when I'm referring to social emotional learning. And again, as I said, you all will see this, and those of you that are familiar with this are probably pretty familiar with CASEL's work, but I wanted to put that out there as a jumping off point for us. This is, again, what CASEL uses, what CASEL uses as their framework, if you will, or their theory of action. So there's the implementation focus areas you can see up there is we want to build a foundational support plan. One of the biggest lessons learned is how do we strengthen adult social emotional learning? Again, this is not a new concept, and recent research that came out that said school divisions back in 2011, places like Nashville, Tennessee, Oakland, California, some school divisions in the Midwest all began to do this work. And they said if they had the chance to do it all over again, their biggest lesson learned is they would have started with adults, right? Oftentimes we think of what are ways that we can support our kids, we can fix our kids, whatever we want to call that, and we make it all about what are we going to do for, to, ultimately with the kids, but we don't take into consideration the adult. And when we think of this space of teaching and learning, we know that that's a very emotional concept, if you will, right? You cannot, the way the brain works is it's all based on emotion when we think about that aspect of teaching and learning. So how we promote it for our students, and then we want to continuously think about how do we improve it. Right? We can't just put it out there and hope that it's going to work or hope that it sticks. It's saying what's working for our students and our adults, what else do we need to be doing? And there, of course, over on the right, you can see the short-term, intermediate, and long-term effects. So some of the research pieces of why this work or where this work started. So what? So what about this? What we know is that emotions matter. Student emotions drive attention, memory, and learning. Emotions also impact our decision making and judgment, the quality of the relationships we're able to create, both physical and mental health, and also everyday effectiveness. And again, wouldn't I and you and all of us argue that that's true of us as adults as well, right? When our emotions are on hyper overload, sometimes it's hard for us to even acquire the right words that we want to use, right? Our decision making can get clouded, and even our everyday effectiveness. So, with that, where I'd like us to take a minute is to look at these 5 competencies. Again, some of you are super familiar with these, and for some of you, this is the first time you're taking a look at them. So, I'm going to be quiet for just a minute, but what I'd invite you to think about as an adult in your role, what is your superpower? Is it being self aware? Is it the relationship skills? Is it that you have great empathy and perspective taking, that social awareness? Are you great at managing your emotions, or do you make those really great responsible decisions? So I'm going to be quiet for a second, and I invite you in the chat, just drop in. What would you say is your superpower? Love these that are coming in. Thank you. Thank you. So we've got some relationship skills, decision making, the listening being lifted up, empathy. We saw some responsible decision makers. Yep, empathy, self management. Ooh, I could use some of that. Building that rapport, being self aware. Yeah, yeah. So that's the first tool I want you to take away with you tonight. I love the fact that we're seeing so much diversity of what people's superpowers are. So when you think about whatever your role may be and the colleagues that you work with, how we execute our superpowers on our own, but also in collaboration. So recognizing whether you are a special educator, you're somebody who is a teacher assistant or instructional assistant, you are a music teacher, you're a high school teacher, you're an administrator, you're a family engagement person. Having this superpower is your bridge to connecting with adults and young people. Your superpower is your bridge to connecting with adults and young people. And just like having that superpower, it's also super important that you recognize what of these areas might be more of a challenge. What of these areas might be more of a challenge? Because those are things you're going to want to use your superpower to try to mitigate some of that. You're going to want to use your superpower to try to mitigate some of those areas that might not be as strong for you. So again, your first tool to put in your pocket tonight is you're walking away recognizing what your social emotional superpower is. So why sell? Why now? It supports the needs of both adult and student well-being. It integrates skills to develop the whole child. Again, it's a lever for equity. Castle is lifting up and exploding with research around how these 5 competencies equip adults and young people to look through things through a lens of equity to ensure those relationships, to ensure that collaboration can happen. It equips students with the skills necessary when we talk about post-secondary and the workforce. It's also grounded in the skills we use for trauma-informed care and restorative practices, and it creates the foundation, the strong foundation for a positive teaching and learning environment. And most importantly, for 13 months, we've been in a storm. We've all been caught in a storm, but we've been riding it out in different boats. And so more than ever, we are experiencing widening gaps in the academic and social behavior needs of our students. Students are coming back to our schools, or they're still in a virtual space, but they have greater social emotional needs than before. And what we're realizing is that students that may have not had gaps prior to COVID are now experiencing those. And students will have to be able to be able to access these social emotional learning skills in order to access their education. Those of you who have had students coming back, or some of you have had students face to face the entire time, a lot of us are in this hybrid model, if you will, and some are virtual and some are are face-to-face. If we think about not only the challenges of students' emotions coming into this space, but also the adults that are supporting them. So more than ever, we can't just ram academics. We need to finish learning. We need to talk about recovery of learning without first and foremost thinking about those relationships and that sense of belonging that's going to need to take place. And especially as we look at how are we opening our schools back up in the fall. And these are the spectrum of student stressors. This came out from the American Institute of Research in December. And again, I would argue that this is not just about student stressors. I think everything up here we could also say impacts us as adults, right? The disruption of those routines. Some of our students outside of school, there aren't a lot of routines. So that's where they came, or they sought that consistency, if you will, in relationships, confusion and uncertainty about what's going to happen next, the loss of special occasions that are associated with education, those that experience food insecurity pre-COVID, or some experiencing food insecurity for the first time, longer periods of time in unsafe situations. So we know that we have both young people and adults oscillating between these low levels of stress and this high stress. And all of us on here as educators know that we have students that are at an increased risk of this. Certainly don't need to read all of these bullets to you, but you see some of the different components that not only in a space pre-COVID, but that this has also increased a greater risk for our students. And that also came out right before the beginning of 2021. And the other thing that I have to lift up, and I'm not trying to bring us down tonight, I'm trying to acknowledge the space that we're in, is that we've been in this space of collective trauma. Not only what has happened with the pandemic, but when we think about racial and societal traumas that have been happening, not just for the past several months, but for hundreds of years, but the exacerbation of what's been happening over the past several months. And so those traumas also increase the stressors. So again, we know there's 3 levels here, right? This comes from the Center on the Developing Child. We know we need to have small doses of positive stress, right? When you get nervous about things, a meeting, you're doing a performance, those are positive, real brief moments. Then there's tolerable stress. And the way we're able to tolerate it is because we can buffer what we might be going through with supportive relationships. But that last piece, and what's really been exacerbated this past 13 months, is more people experiencing more prolonged activation of stress responses. And so that toxic stress builds over time. And what happens when we stay in periods of long stress is that it negatively affects our capacity to have those self-management and self-regulation skills, our awareness of self and others, that sometimes we become withdrawn, and it impacts our ability to engage and to form those relationships, and also to be able to attend to information. So we know more than ever, pre-COVID, social emotional learning is an important priority. But now in the midst of and post-COVID, we are probably collectively looking at 8 to 15 years to recover from, especially our youngest of learners, what this experience is all about. Going into a kindergarten classroom the other day, they're the most amazing kids, right? They're with their little masks, they're behind their barriers, they're just trudging along. But to see 2 kids that typically would be 6 kids at a table, not sharing materials, not engaging in play in a close capacity, again, they're moving through, and teachers, you're teaching your hearts out, but at the same time, that's a gap in skills that we're seeing, right? Even talking about, some people have talked about, my kids are reading more and on higher levels in this virtual space, but when they came back to us in a face-to-face space, we realized their fine motor skills aren't there. They don't know how to handle utensils or pencils because everything has been in this typing format. And then they get frustrated when they're trying to manipulate some of those fine motor skills. Our secondary students navigating in all of this virtual space and relying so much on social media to make those connections, where we know that that social media is a game of comparison oftentimes, where people are feeling less than. And so also it's taking away their ability to have that face-to-face conversation and relationship piece. So again, we have to really think about everything that I just laid out for you. And so I want to be quiet for a second. And I just think it's important in the midst of this learning tonight that you just have a few minutes to reflect. So I'm going to stop talking, just thinking about from us opening up to what the definition of social emotional learning is, and then the things that we unpacked along the way, where we've been in this 13 months, and just think about how does this impact your work and or the stakeholders you support. So I'm just going to be quiet just to give you a minute to collect some thoughts, and then we're going to forge forward with some strategies. Oh, I don't want to start the timer again. All right. So thank you for letting me provide that space just for a little bit of reflection before we forge forward. But what I would assert, as we've been through this storm together, as we are collectively passionate about how we support our students and our families and our staff, that we have to anchor our actions in social emotional learning, that we have to be intentional. I know I have a lot of folks in here that are advanced in this. And so what I might share with you might not be new concepts, but what I love about this is when I work with brand new teachers or veteran teachers is really thinking about how am I intentionally doing this in the space that we are in now? And again, hard to believe we're already in the middle of April, but thinking about as we welcome students back next year, what do we want to be really intentional in with this work? Because again, one of the things that always resonates with me, if we think about our rising third graders, if they chose to not come back in any type of face-to-face space, the last time they sat in a seat in a building, they were first graders, and we will be expecting them to begin to do test taking. So thinking about that gap of some of the social emotional skills that they have missed when they're coming back, thinking about our rising sixth graders that left out as fourth graders, thinking about our rising ninth graders that left out as seventh graders. So not only do we have to think about learning recovery, and we have to think about, and I don't like using loss because teachers have been teaching their hearts out. It's just been the conditions and the environment pieces. So thinking about, again, how we want to ground our work in that. So what I assert is that it can happen anytime, anywhere. There are great programs out there, Ripple, Second Step, all kinds of computer-based programs. I think those are really great for interventions and also giving kids some autonomy about what they want to learn. But it also can be infused anytime, anywhere throughout the day. And that's the power of it, is being intentional. So what I love to share are the 6 quick, easy ways to implement social emotional learning. And no matter what your role is in a building, these are things that any person can contribute to. There are live links for all of these. Some of them are videos that take you to Edutopia that give you some different examples. A couple are articles. I do sessions about unpacking all of these and coming up with action plans. But again, trying to streamline tonight. But first of all, how are you creating community? Not only school-wide, but what do you do to intentionally create community within the classroom? That's what promotes social awareness skills, those relationship skills. Thinking about how we greet young people. We had to overhaul all of that in this virtual space. High fives, virtual hugs. Now we're in a socially distant space and we're having to be creative about that. But calling students by name, saying their names correctly, acknowledging them in the space that they're entering in. I was in a blended classroom environment in a band room the other day. So there's several students in person, but then the students who were at home, their names were in the spaces where they would be within that band room. So if you were here with us, we have a space for you. We recognize that you're virtual and you're playing the clarinet, but this is where you would be in a second chair situation. And just being intentional about the community and that you belong here, no matter what that looks like right now. Catching kids doing the right thing. And this isn't about a program or a recognition program. This one is really big for me. What we have to do for our students is we have to create emotional memories for them. Pre-COVID and certainly during and post-COVID, we hear educators say things like they don't put any effort in. They don't try hard enough. The one I always got is I talked too much and was off task. And what I remember collectively until I was in 5th grade was every time being caught doing something I wasn't supposed to. So when a teacher would say, you need to stop talking, you need to get back on task, I was at a loss because that was something that nobody ever caught me doing. When we tell a kid time and time again, try harder, be more like your neighbor, that just takes any of the willingness to have effort away. But when you catch a kid and maybe they're not using as much effort as you would like, but when you quietly walk over to a kid and say, I love the effort you're using on this algebra problem. I love the effort that you're using to read this passage. On Thursday, when they're not using that effort, you're able to say to them, remember on Tuesday, remember when I told you that you were using that? You've created an emotional memory for them now to attach back to. So that's creating self-awareness for them. So then they're better able to apply the skill that we don't always see in them. Compliments are another huge thing. When we think about this space of trying to build self-awareness and self-management for kids to identify what their strengths are, think about even us as adults, we're often not very good at accepting compliments. When I ask kids, what's something nice that you can do, or how are we kind? Well, if you fall down, then you help somebody up. That's the most common response I get from kids. So that's awesome. If you fall down, you got a kid who's going to help you up. But how do we genuinely get kids to be able to say nice things that they see in themselves and also for others? That's that perspective taking and the ability to build those relationships. The 5th is problem solving. How do we do a better job of modeling problem solving for our students? Because whether they're 4 or they're 18, it is one of the biggest skills they lack. If you look at standardized test data across the state of Virginia, one of the biggest deficits is in multi-step problem solving. And I would argue one of the biggest ones is in multi-step problem solving for life skills, right? I can't unzip my jacket. I can't get my jacket off. I can't get my jacket off. We have a generation that has learned helplessness because in a fever pitch to be amazing educators and to move through so much content, often the default is if I can't do it, someone will do it for me. So again, we also know that we have young people that aren't supported sometimes with adults who have the ability, the time, or the space sometimes to model problem solving either. So what we need to do is sometimes it's just about taking 4 or 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be long. One of my favorite experiences of doing this was with a 7th grade group. And what I told them about is how I got pulled over by the police. And they all said, were you speeding, Ms. Peterson? I said, not this time. I had my cruise control set. What's cruise control? So I had to explain to them what that was. I said, On your license plate, you have these things called tags, and mine were expired. And I wanted to tell the state trooper that I take care of the inside of the house and my husband takes care of the outside of the house. And I said, but I knew I'd get a ticket anyway. I said, so what could Mrs. Peterson have done differently? First of all, they said, well, what are tags? Tell us again. So I went to the DMV site, I pulled up a license plate, and I showed them what tags were. Within 2 seconds, Deontay's hand went screaming up in the air and he said, Mrs. Peterson, your husband is going to die one day and you are going to need to be able to know how to order your own tags. You already know how to go to the DMV website, so you are more than capable of ordering your own tags. So again, that whole stretch took me 5 to 6 minutes. It was a great lesson for Mrs. Peterson that she does know how to do things on her own, but I taught them about DMV. I taught them about tags. Yes, Dante was good. He equipped me with some skills that I need. Again, you all know kids love it when you make a mistake and they get to help you fix that. But what we have to do is we have to prepare them. You are going to face barriers. When we're studying about rock formation, this is going to be a problem that you run into. What are some strategies that we can do to alleviate that? In this virtual space, you're not going to always get the things that you need. How do we move past that? So just preparing them, everything isn't going to always come the way they expect, but helping them think, what are ways I can do this problem solving. And then the last piece, y'all, is closure. Just like we want to welcome them in, we have to think about how are we sending them out. This is in particularly important for my secondary friends. And also thinking about when we have kids who are navigating between resource and back to their classrooms at the elementary level, or for those of you that departmentalize at the elementary level as well. How we send them out is how they go into someone else's space. And I would also argue how you send them out a lot of times in the evening is how they may return to you the next morning. And so that clean slate piece to let them reset their emotions and you reset your emotions is why we need closure. The other couple things I'll say really quick about closure, especially at the elementary level, when kids stay with us typically and we move from content to content, if we don't close out a content, we're doing fractions and all of a sudden I'm in Jamestown. I'm not with you in Jamestown because I'm still working on fractions because I didn't know math was over. Even if you say, oh, it's social studies time, that doesn't necessarily mean my learning's closed out. The bigger piece when we talk about this from a social emotional standpoint is how do we close out our day from that social and emotional side. Whew. It was a tough one today, friends. Everybody was talking over one another. Ms. Peterson's tired today. So when we come back tomorrow, what are we going to do different so that we make sure that we're respecting one another? Or I can't wait till we come back tomorrow and we start all over. Again, it can be 2 minutes. What I linked for you here is a video that I absolutely love, and it's high school students doing this, and it's ahas, appreciations, and apologies. So I encourage you, when you get the slide deck, check that out. But it's a way to close out your time together with students. It's not something that has to be done every single day, but it's really powerful, and the fact that they do it in high school is impressive as well. I didn't mean to do that, sorry. All right. Whew. So that's the first half really about why are we doing this, the importance of doing this, and some of those strategy pieces. So this last chunk before we stop and pause to do some questions is really about honoring you. Thinking about what you've been through over these past 13 months, thinking about pre-COVID, the passion, the purpose, the time and commitment that you poured into what you do. And during this difficult time, you've stayed committed. Things are ever changing. They change from minute to minute. Not that that wasn't true before COVID, but even more so. You've had to learn and adapt. You've had to put the needs of others first. You've had to collaborate more than ever. You've had to support students and families. You've had families in your classrooms more than ever now in this space, but you've been showing up and you've been making connections. And so amidst that, I want to share just this quick video of the space that we might have been in. And this comes from Brad Montague.
For navigating too much weed. Some days life can be challenging. Seems to match you in feeling. Sometimes you must declare it's all too much to eat. Too much processed, too much to see, too much to handle, too much cat pee. I don't even own a tat. When you look at life and too muchery abounds, pause, listen to your breath and the way that sounds. Reach out to people, all the friends you can think of, because absurd times calls for absurd amounts of love. So remember, dear friend, there's no need to worry. Together we are more than enough for all that you mentioned.
So I love that word, too muchery. And that's definitely a space that a lot of us have been in. So with that being said, I don't want to show you the video again. We talk about, checking in with our students and where their emotions are and really trying to support them. And I think as educators, sometimes we're expected to put on these smiley faces, but behind those masks, a lot of times we're experiencing our own set of emotions as well. So what I invite you to do, and would love to hear from you, when you hear this word resilience, what comes to mind for you? What definition or what thoughts or what words come to mind when you hear this notion of resilience? I just invite you to throw that in the chat. Yeah, bouncing back. Keep on keeping on. Bravery, knowing what to ask for, space in order to recover, bouncing back, yeah. Being steadfast, having lived the experience, know everything will eventually be okay, overcoming those obstacles, being able to bounce back and recover. Yep, hanging in there and keep on trying, overcoming. Yep, right on, Amanda, being able to overcome. Having faith that this too shall pass. Yep, that spring back. Yep. Overcoming problems, absolutely. Taking care of you in the midst of it all to stay focused and on track, tenacity, and that renewed energy to continue pressing forward. Yes, yes. And during that hardship and overcoming, these are fabulous, absolutely. Again, it's how we weather that storm, that bounce back, and moving from a space of thriving, not just surviving. And that's why I just wanted to take a couple minutes to share this with you all tonight. I was in a webinar a few months ago now, and it was Elena Aguilar's work. And you may be familiar with her, and I cited her in here. But she talks about this notion of resilience. She has a great book called Onward, and she also has some other coaching books. But I loved what she said is that it's not just good enough for us to be in a space of survival. And that's really where it's felt like we've been. Right? I can remember days, things were going fine, but someone would say, well, how are you doing? Oh, I'm just making it, I'm just surviving. And it became our default during this really tough time. So again, knowing that the body keeps score, right? Thinking about some of those days that you felt more tired than you've ever felt before, or I just don't know how I'm going to do this. We have to recognize that our bodies do keep score and that we have a reservoir tank of resilience, but that can get low. And when our tank is low, then it has an impact on our students. And some of us, kids are super resilient. We say that all the time, but we also have kids that use all of their resilience up outside of school because they're trying to bounce back and weather some really tough storms outside of school. So sometimes when we need them to have that academic resilience, it's not there. And when we talk about social emotional learning from an adult perspective, one of the first things I say to teachers, what are your triggers, right? Does talking loud drive you crazy? Does getting up and sharpening pencils? What are your triggers in the classroom? Because if you're not putting in structures and processes to mitigate your own triggers, then you're going to stay in a space of being triggered. And that's also going to empty that reservoir tank of resilience. So I just wanted to share 12 strategies. This is not a checklist. This is not you must do all of these. And I also ask you to think about what you said as we started our time together about what brings you joy. Some of those things are very much connected to these strategies. Again, thinking about what's our self-talk like. I know for me, sometimes nobody could ever say something as awful as I say to myself sometimes. So what are we saying to ourselves? Are we noticing where we are? Do we need to get up? Do we need to sit down? Do we need to take a drink of water? Breathing. This is one of the first times that I've ever experienced true panic attacks or anxiety at the beginning of the pandemic. There were a lot of things going on personally as well as professionally, and I couldn't catch my breath. And that's a terrible feeling. So really knowing how to be able to take those breaths during times of anxiety, during times of high emotions, and recognizing and accepting your emotions. Just like that graphic that I showed you, that a lot of times people put on those bright, shiny faces, or we have people saying, it's fine, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. When really it's not okay right now. And it's okay that it's not okay. What are we doing to move past that? Staying connected to people, but the right people, the people who do bring you joy, the people who do speak life into you, not the ones that constantly take from us. And y'all know we all have those people. They come to you to pep them up, but they're just constantly taking and taking. And you have to think of ways to take care of yourself. And that may even be connecting with what we said of what brings you joy. I know people are tired of hearing, especially educators, this whole self-care. You're not getting more money, you're not getting more time. So how is that self-care? But again, what is it that you need that will help to fill those tanks? Using perspective taking and being kind to yourself. My word for school year 2021 was grace. We've been extending a lot of grace to others, but you have to give it to yourself. And also sometimes you have to have those distractions. Some of you talked about going and seeing those sunset or walking your dogs or listening to music. Distract yourself with the right things. Sometimes this is our biggest enemy, right? We get sucked into that vortex, whether it's watching news, whether it's social media, whatever it may be, playing games, right? Those are temporary. And if you limit your time, those can be positive distractions. But we also have to think about what are we using to distract ourselves? Looking for those bright spots, those people who bring you joy, all of those things that we mentioned, and practicing gratitude. When we can get in a space of gratitude, it changes our whole emotional state. I love doing it with kids when we're having a rough day, and I just say, let's stop. What's one thing we're grateful for? If you could say thank you to someone right now, and you can't do it every day because it does lose its shine, I get that. But sometimes just thinking, what are we grateful for? And that you all as educators know more than anybody, change comes and goes. And so how do we ride the wave? How do we ride the wave? We know sometimes the big waves come and sometimes it's just those that are lapping on the shore. So how we navigate those. And it's a two-way street. And this is how I bring us all together tonight. So it started off talking about what social emotional learning is and why it's so important more than ever. It was important before, it will remain important now, and as we navigate this. When we think about these graduates that we're trying to create in the portrait of a graduate, what I say is that social emotional learning is the canvas that that portrait sits on. And if we're building our resilience as educators, then we ultimately promote it in students. And if students are having resilience, it's going to feed back into us with those positive relationships. We're going to explicitly teach those social emotional skills, fostering positive emotions, recognizing it's okay to not be okay, but giving strategies for how we get past that, helping our students understand and identify they have strengths and what are they, and just building that sense of meaning and purpose in what we do as educators, but also in that connection point for our students. So moving forward, what I would say to you, again, a lot of you were advanced on here, keep on keeping, keep on being disciples of this work. Those of you that are just starting out on this journey, more than ever, you can find out information on this, but be intentional about how you integrate it into your role. If you support adults, make sure you're modeling for adults what this can look like in and with the students they support. Take time to focus on your own self skills. Remember, your tool, one of your tools tonight is that superpower you have. So use it, model it, and share it. And that link takes you to a CASEL document about the importance of adult social emotional skills. Make time for you and your bounce back skills. Your resilience unlocks student resilience. And the best way to grow SEL is to model it. You can put a kid on a program for 30 minutes. You can teach an explicit program, but then if we turn around and our emotions are out of check, then we've just defeated everything that we just tried to do. So recognize your emotions, recognize the strategies that work for you so you can be a great model for our students. So just before we hop off for some questions, just would love to get some feedback, anything new that you might have learned today or something you might implement. If you just throw that in the chat, it's a way for me to just recognize if there was something that you had as a takeaway. So something new or something that you will implement. I love that, Stephanie. Thank you. Yes, please take care of yourselves. Great, Mandy. Yes, take that superpower, Laura. Yes, I love that. Yes, get our kids to see what those are. Yes, Jody, you can't put other people's masks on until you put yours on first. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that. And keep on using it. Keep on being that disciple for this work. Yes, thank you guys. Glad you have a better understanding and a few strategies. Yes, share that superpower piece. Share it. Thank you. Love that. Great, Regina. So again, just want to make space for time. You guys can keep sharing those, but again, I just can't thank you all enough for being here tonight at 7 o'clock in the evening till 8 o'clock. It's huge, and I just appreciate that and recognize you guys being here is taking away from other things that you could be doing. So I appreciate that so much. I am going to drop, since you are here, I'm going to drop in the link so that you will have access to the slides tonight. And also, I know Janie said she would also be sending those out to you as well. But please take those and use them as you see fit. And I will hang out if you have any questions or anything that I can do before we wrap up for the evening. That's great to hear, Barbara. Thank you guys so much for being here. Again, if you have any questions, I'll hang out, or you can throw those in the chat. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Regina. I appreciate you being here. Thanks, Aaron. Night, Regina. Thank you. Appreciate that, Amanda. Thanks. Appreciate that, Allie. Have fun giving him a bath. Mine's 17. He doesn't want me to give him a bath. That's great reflection, Barbara. Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Stephanie. Again, I forgot to mention, you guys certainly can email me, or if you're a Twitter person. Yes, Catherine, our emotions have a huge impact. That's interesting, Regina. Thank you, Yvonne.
Well, it looks like it's starting to dwindle down a bit. So last call for questions here before we head out and end our webinar. If there's anything you want to ask, go ahead and ask it in the chat now. Otherwise, you can email Heather or myself after tonight, and we'll be glad to answer any questions that you don't want to put in the chat. But we'll give it about 1 more minute here for the chat, and then we'll go ahead and end our webinar.
Thanks, Martha. Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for all of your chatting and sharing. Thanks, Regina. Have a good night.
All right, Heather, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I learned so much, and we had tons of positive comments in the chat as you were presenting.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity, Janie. It was a pleasure.
Of course. I'm going to go ahead and end our webinar. Again, thank you, and I will get out your slide information, and I'll post this recording at whro.org/webinar.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Yep. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.